You're listening to A Radio.
Landing ground.
Thank you for joining us. You are listening to A Radio, and this is the Morning Moment. We're on weekdays, 11:45 Eastern. Follow us on Spreaker.com and click on the like button. Happy New Year, everybody. I'm sorry I'm suffering under a bit of a cold at the moment. I'm trying to get over it, but we'll fight through. I decided to open this US election year with a topic a lot of us are familiar with, for different reasons. If 2019 has to go down in history for something, then certainly in Canada and the UK, it is for that one word, hate. So I decided it might be interesting to discuss this word. For many of us who use social media on a regular basis, you will be all too aware of what that means to you. Many of us know someone or are aware of someone who, due to the Silicon Valley Nazis operating on a number of social media platforms, have in fact removed these people. They have defined the word hate as anything they don't like. Now, many in the US are pushing for social media to be regulated. Now, I'm not a regulator person. I don't believe in that stuff. But in this case, there is a case for this. Now, a very broad definition is, in this case, which can, however, be narrowed down to something more succinct, that of being anything that is related in any way to anything, quote, Donald Trump. Let me explain. At this point, I want to refer back to a previous podcast that I did, and it was called Project Blue, in which, after a successful campaign for the presidency of the United States, against what the mainstream media thought at the time were impossible odds, saw Donald Trump's success in 2016. Ever since, there has been, as we all know, a non-stop barrage of attacks on the president, obviously culminating in the fake impeachment so far. But I digress. But do I? Because that is hate, isn't it? But for some unknown reason, because it comes from the glitterati, the mainstream media, the arts and entertainment world, and obviously the political world, even from some in the same party, all this is considered acceptable. And yet, it's hate. It's non-stop hate. Consider another example. Remember that governor of that state admitting dressing up in blackface. A Democrat. No problem, because he's a Democrat. No hate there. Then there's that disgusting vitriol coming from those members of Congress who have lied and cheated the American electorate to reach office, who also are given a pass for their hate. No, it seems as though those who claim to be either anti-Trump or claim to be Democrats in the United States, not only that, they openly attacked Israel for their very existence, all the while claiming support for Israel. No, to my mind and to many sane people, this is nothing more than hate. But yeah, let's give them a pass. And they're still on Facebook, they're still on Twitter, they're still on all these platforms, and they're on TV non-stop, if you care to watch those channels, which I don't. Now, it appears there are so-called hate laws even in the United States. However, thank God they are constrained by the US Constitution. Now, the same, unfortunately, can't be said in my country, however, or the country I came from. I gave you some examples last year in the UK. The most famous, obviously, was the attack by the UK establishment on the well-known personality of Tommy Robinson. Not only was he removed from Twitter, I'm not sure about Facebook, I've no idea, I don't get involved in that operation, there was even evidence that he had done nothing wrong, video evidence, yet he still went to jail. While vicious ethnic groups, and I can be no more specific than that, due to the lack of free speech in Canada, roamed and continue to roam the UK streets with impunity for creating no-go zones for Christians and others. I can't put it any more precise than that. I further gave you evidence of ordinary citizens in the UK harassed by the police on pure hearsay, even to the extent of being jailed for having allegedly saying something to someone about something. Even people are being trolled by the UK police on social media, and the social media organisations are giving up their addresses, and the police are coming round to their houses and arresting them. Now, 2019 did in fact quietly but very precisely usher in the 1984 era. Not only British society, but many Western countries. What are they afraid of? What are they afraid of? This was all done under the umbrella of hate speech. And so I turned to my own country of Canada, which unfortunately is a totally different kettle of fish. So at this point, I'm going to read to you the following from the Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East. It's a fact sheet on hate speech in Canada. I'm going to read to you Section 2B of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which states, everyone has the following fundamental freedoms: freedom of thought, belief, opinion, expression, including freedom of the press and other media of communication. That bit is very important these days. However, Section 1 of the Charter specifies that the rights of freedoms are subject only to such reasonable limits prescribed by laws as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. Unquote. This suggests that there may be limits to the Charter rights, including freedom of expression, but only those limits that can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. Now I'm going to read out Section 319. I think this is a Justice Bill or something. I don't know what it is, but it's some law that the Canadian government's managed to pass, which in my mind is unconstitutional. Anyway, Section 319 defines public incitement of hatred is an indictable offence. Hate speech lacks a formal international definition, but is usually described as written or oral communication perceived to disparage a person or group of people based on their social or ethnic group. The danger of inciting violence or prejudicial action against such groups is often mentioned. Two sections of the Canadian Criminal Code are relevant. First is Section 319 and then Section 318. 1. Everyone who by communicating statements in any public place incites hatred against an identifiable group where such incitement is likely to lead to a breach of the peace is guilty of, quote, A, an indictable offence and is liable to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 2 years, or B, an offence punishable by summary conviction. 2. Everyone communicating statements other than in a private conversation willfully promotes hatred against any identifiable group is guilty of A, an indictable offence and is liable to imprisonment for terms not exceeding 2 years, or B, an offence punishable by summary conviction. However, there are some defences against such charges. Subsection 3 of Section 319 states no person shall be convicted of an offence under subsection 2, A, if he establishes that a statement communicated were true. B. If in good faith the person expressed or attempted to establish an argument, an opinion on a religious subject or opinion based on a belief in a religious text. C. If the statements were relevant to any subject of public interest, the discussion of which was for the public benefit, and if, on reasonable grounds, he believed them to be true, or D. If, in good faith, he intended to point out for the purpose of their removal matters producing or tending to produce feelings of hatred towards an identifiable group in Canada. Under Section 319, quote, statements include words spoken or written or recorded electronically, electromagnetically, whatever that is, or otherwise, and gestures, signs, and other visible representations. Well, there you have it. That's when lawyers write laws rather than ordinary people. That's why I hate lawyers, because they're incompetent. They can't speak English. They don't understand English. Legalese is not English. But thereby hangs the problem itself, doesn't it? In their very first line is the fact that in an infringement on our Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, yet these legal numbnuts and mindless politicians refuse to challenge such laws passed in Canada. Very laws that are, to any lawman, understanding of the law is, to use a phrase not often uttered in Canada, and that is unconstitutional. They are unconstitutional. Section 319 of the Justice Act, to my mind, is unconstitutional. No law can undermine our right to free speech, yet they continue to support such laws, even adding to them. And this is where I get angry. I, for one, refuse to support any party that does not defend our right to be insulted and offended. Yes, you heard me right. If we can't be insulted and offended by an action or deed, then we are, in fact, not free, are we? I will give you an example of the word hate. Actually, I will give you the definition of the word hate. Hate, intense hostility and aversion usually deriving from fear, anger and sense of injury. B. Extreme dislike or disgust, antipathy, loathing. C. A systematic or especially politically exploited expression of hatred, a crime motivated by bigotry and hate. Another example, an object of hatred, a generation whose finest hate had been big business. I will now give you a list of alternative words for hate. So the question has to be, are these words not appropriate as well? Animosity, antagonism, enmity, hatred, obviously, horror, hostility, loathing, pain, rancour, resentment, revenge, venom, abhorrence, abomination, anathema, animus, antipathy, aversion, bother, bugbear, disgust, exertion, grievance, gripe, irritant, malevolence, malignity, nuisance, objection, odium, rankling, repugnance, repulsion, revulsion, scorn, spite, trouble. The list goes on and on. Again, a clear example of a ridiculous law. So for those and other words in mind, consider the failure of any law whose objective is to stifle the open and free discourse in a public space. I give you an example. If I was to say, of course, I hated liberals, would that be considered hate speech? If I was to say I hated the Federal Liberal Communist Party of Canada, is that hate speech? The reason I ask this is that it does fit the criteria of an identifiable group. Are there not groups of liberals who identify themselves as liberals in Canada? So even if they clearly don't understand the true meaning of the word liberal, they are an identifiable group. So using the Canadian logic in their law, this is in fact hate speech. So on that basis, if you don't like Liberals, you don't like their policies, that you believe they are destroying the country of Canada and are rapidly turning Canada, in your mind, into a third world bankrupt nation, then if you were to hold that view, you are, according to Canadian law, guilty of hate speech. Do you see not only how ridiculous any law of this type can be, but far more important than that, is the insidious, and to that matter, any legislation of this type is insidious, but it is also dangerous to any thriving democratic community. An individual or political party who stands up in favour of such legislation is not only guilty, in my mind, of unconstitutional behaviour and deserves to be removed from office, but, to my mind, is also guilty of the treasonous act against the country and its citizens. I think we would do well to consider this as only the first salvo attack on our freedoms in Canada. So I give you, for the first month of 2020, hate speech. Is it a word? Is it an action? Is it a deed? Or is it a freedom? One that you should cherish, one that you should argue in public. Maybe you should ask your political leaders, wherever you are, why can't I debate this? Why can't I discuss this? What are you scared of? Now we know that the Silicon Valley Nazis are scared of hate speech, but nobody asks them why. And are we all guilty of falling into the trap of calling free speech hate speech? You can find more at aradio.wordpress.com, where you can find links to us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Gab, Spotify, and email. We're on Spotify under the podcast section. Type in Canadian Politics with a twist and you'll find us. We are continuing to reach out to you, so please pass these links on to your friends. Please click on the follow button on Spreaker.com. You can listen to all our morning moments at Spreaker.com/aradio. EHRADIO, a radio. And please click on the like button. Join us Monday, Wednesday and Friday at 11:45 Eastern, and tell your friends and pass the word. We only tell the truth, not what the mainstream media want you to know.